Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. Today is Wednesday, January 12th, and it is 12:02 p.m. Sorry for the late start, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started, call this meeting to order, this special board meeting to order. And as we do at every board meeting, we'll read our board norms and protocols. And as a board, we agree to respect the differences of opinions in making decisions for the district, to follow best practices in managing the superintendent and the management of the board itself, to stay on task when conducting business for the district, including while at board meetings, to never surprise the superintendent or each other when conducting official business of the district, to read these norms at the beginning of each board meeting and at board workshops as a reminder of how to conduct our meetings, and to continually self-check to determine if we are following our norms when conducting district business. Again, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, board colleagues that are here present in person and those that are joining us via Zoom, to our staff that are here with us today, and to any guests that we have watching on YouTube or in person as well. Thank you for joining us. With that, I'll ask Ms. Smith to do a roll call, please.
Yolanda Clark. Yolanda Clark. Maxine Drew.
Maxine Drew, present.
Janie Humphreys.
Present.
Randy Lopez.
Randy Lopez, present.
Wanda Brownlee Page.
Wanda Brownlee Page, present.
Rachel Russell. Dr. Nguyen.
Dr. Nguyen, present.
Thank you.
Ms. Clark, can you hear us okay? Ms. Clark, can you hear us? I see you on Zoom. I just want to make sure you can hear us. All right. Ms. Clark? She just unmuted. Just want to make sure you can hear us, Ms. Clark. Are you there? Okay. Maybe if we can get Ms. Smith, if you wouldn't mind, maybe just checking to see if she can hear us.
Can hear you now.
Oh, okay, great. There you are.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Thank you for indulging me there, board. All right, now I would entertain a motion to approve today's special agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion or questions? Hearing none. Ms. Smith, roll call, please.
Yolanda Clark.
Yolanda Clark, yes.
Maxine Drew.
Maxine Drew, yes.
Janie Humphreys.
Janie, yes.
Randy Lopez.
Randy Lopez, yes.
Wanda Brownlee Page.
Wanda Brownlee Page, yes.
Rachel Russell. Dr. Nguyen.
Dr. Nguyen, yes.
Thank you.
Great, agenda has been approved. Thank you so much. All right, so we'll jump right into our agenda. First up is a conversation. Yesterday, board, we received information about TPT and varsity tutoring. Again, hopefully you've had a chance to review all of the information. This is coming as a recommendation. Yesterday was information. Today it is coming before us, requested to be approved for this tutoring. So hopefully you've had a chance, again, to review the information. Dr. Stubblefield, if there's anything that you want to add around this, board, we will open for questions here in a minute. But Dr. Stubblefield, anything you need to add on that?
I don't have any additional information, but if you have questions, we do have staff available either online or in person to answer questions.
Great, thank you. So board, if there are questions on this agenda item, I'll open up for questions. And I see Ms. Humphreys. Thank you.
If I remember correctly, they said this contract runs through June 30th. What the gentleman said last night. How are we going to evaluate how effective it is before we look at extending it for another year?
Good afternoon, board. Mr. Lopez, Dr. Stubblefield, Matthew Anderson here. I can answer that question. The TPT runs till June 30th. The varsity will run till the end of May. We will do a couple of things. Each company does a pre-test, excuse me, a pre-test and a post-assessment. So that's one set of data that we'll use. We will also track the students that are part of the tutoring program using our universal screener, which is FastBridge. to see if they're making progress through those skills that have been identified as areas of growth for them. So we'll be using that, and then also we'll use the CAP assessment at the end of the year to see if that's had an impact on their performance.
And my second question is, in the past, when we've done tutoring with our children, we have pulled them out of other classes. So they've been pulled out of their music class or their art class. And I want to make sure that our kids aren't being punished in that way.
Principals have been informed that this is not, students that are being part of the tutoring are not to be pulled from their specials classes, so art, music, PE, library, they won't be pulled from there, and they won't be pulled for recess as well.
Okay, thank you.
And I can provide additional clarity on that. The goal is, as we look at ensuring that small group instruction takes place within our school settings, those are the times in which tutors will be supporting students, in which they will partner with school administration to determine the proper times to assist students in that small group area.
I did have one clarifying question on the TPT proposal or estimate that was provided. Just one clarifying, is the cost at $335 per, or is it $330? Because I see both in the estimate, it's calculated at the $335, but if I'm reading it correctly, the estimate also shows a $330. I think that's what that amount is. So at either $804,000 versus $792,000. And I'm sorry, I should have sent that to you.
No, you're
sooner. I
fine. It will be
apologize.
the 804,000 is what we've been budgeting for, is the
Okay.
804. So the 335.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. I should have sent that to you sooner. Just wanted to clarify that. Thank you. Dr. Nguyen, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Lopez. So let me follow up on two of the questions that were just asked. If they're not pulled out, so they are going to be during their school session?
That is correct.
And secondly, will someone initial that contract to make that correction, whether it's 300 or 335?
Yes,
Yes.
we will work with Mr. Graham from TPT to make sure that you get that initialed and corrected.
Okay, so my then questions are, explain the difference in rates for the tutors. Why is there a difference?
So the difference between TPT and varsity,
Correct, you have one 300 or whatever and one 125.
the difference between the two tutoring, one is the in-person session. They are going to be in person with our students. The other is virtual. The virtual offers us more flexibility and allows us to work with more students at different times. When we have the TPT, there's only so many that we can have. And so you have less flexibility, and so your cost is going to be a little different. The other thing that varsity offers are some whole group sessions. So if students that are part of the tutoring want to join a large group session on ACT prep or SAT prep or even in elementary, they can access those as well. So
And
there's
have
a
we
little-
worked out the virtual glitches?
it's all going to go through our single sign-on, which is clever. Not working yet. We will work with the company to make sure that all students can get in through the single sign-on. Once pending board approval, we will get going on that as soon as possible to work out some of the glitches that may occur. That kind of goes with anything that's virtual.
Right, that will occur. Are these numbers, 2,400 and 1,639, is that the total student population at these schools, designated schools?
That's at the 20%. So we are looking at supporting 20% of our student body, which fits nicely into that tier 2, those students that are at some risk for not meeting skills, and then working into some of the students that are at that high risk. So it's at about 20% of the student population.
With the 20%, will that capture the most vulnerable students, the lowest scoring students?
It'll capture, if we wanted to, I'm going to say, find those students that we can move up into that tier 1. It can move a nice portion of those. It can also move a portion of the others. Our goal is to kind of push that tier 2 group up and a little bit of that group 3 into the tier 2 to help lower that achievement gap. If we find that it is having a really positive impact, we can consider increasing the number of students that we get into that tier 3 as well.
And did I correctly read SAT prep courses?
There are, that goes with that large group piece. So there's an SAT prep possibility or ACT prep that varsity offers.
Why would we use an SAT prep when no,
That was just one of the things that they gave me as an information, so I put it on there. I should have put the ACT prep versus the SAT prep.
do you know who the in-kind alumni are?
Mike Graham is actually an alum of KCKPS, so I think this is his gift back to KCKPS, is his,
So that's just one person?
I believe so.
Yes.
And I'd like to just add, Michael Graham is a former student of mine that I taught through middle school here in Kansas City, Kansas School District. So he has a very strong, passionate way of wanting to give back to our district.
Well, that is great, and I don't doubt anyone's capacity. We didn't have clarification on the proposal. What, can the board view possibly the simulated tutoring sessions?
I can work with varsity to see what we can have available to do that.
And last but not least, I thought the athletic department already had their, for lack of a better word, wrap-around services for the athletes. Why are the athletes included in this proposal?
We did not want to exclude any of our students, and especially part of the opportunity for those students, our athletes, to have the opportunity during that Wednesday early release day to seek tutoring support based upon some of the feedback that we were provided on some of the lack of supports that our athletes were given, and not having the opportunity to return back to playing sports.
You know, and I understand that, but the pitch was such a strong, let's say, the athletic department and administration made such a strong pitch for us to allow student athletes and others to play with Fs because they had such a system. And because 90% of our students are not at grade level, if my opinion and perception is that if you already have slots and a system for athletes, then it opens up more slots for students who are not at grade level.
Correct, and we will be just looking into those students and what that 20% entails at each building. And I think, Dr. Nguyen, that'll be something we'll have to come back to and follow up on, ensuring that we are providing the opportunities for all students that need that, and maybe not double dipping.
Thank you, Mr. Lopez.
Thank you, Dr. Nguyen. Are there other questions? Ms. Page?
Yeah, I want to go back to the question Ms. Humphreys had about not pulling them out of specials. And in my mind, as a social studies teachers, they were always pulling them out of ours. So I want to speak on behalf of them, social studies and science core classes, because in my mind, you're going to pull them out of somebody's class. I don't see that happening. And for us to sit here and say, well, we're not going to pull them out of specials, well, you're going to pull them out of somewhere. So if I'm teaching social studies or science, I feel what I do is just as valuable as anybody else. So I don't see them taking them out of reading and math. So that definitely, in my mind, I'm thinking, because it happened to me for 30 years, that they're going to be pulled out of those social studies or science classes. And they're all important. It's not to negate anybody, but let's be real. They got to be pulled out of somebody's class if you're going to do this.
So the intent for the in-person tutor is not to pull them out of any classes, but if it's social studies time that they have small group, So the teacher may be working with me, Anna, and then the tutor would be working with Randy. So all of the kids are in there, but there's additional, it's the tutoring is happening, or the skill set or whatever is happening during that time. So they're not missing, or the goal is for them not to miss whole class instruction or the things that are happening in class, but to push in and provide it the support while they're doing those things. So it will be more doing independent work time or small group work time for the in-person tutoring. And when you look at the schools that are targeted, specifically at the elementary level, that'll happen more naturally in the elementary level. But like when you look at the secondary level, if they are coming in and it's a group of students that are in algebra and they have it first hour, because the tutor could potentially be there all day, depending on the kids who need support. So they would coordinate with the math teacher. They would possibly be in there when the math teacher is giving the instruction. And then when they break out in the math class, they're providing that support at that time. And if additional supports are needed outside of that, then they can work individually with the administration and those students. And it may be on a Wednesday that they do the follow-up in person. So as much as possible, they would not be pulled out, but also strategically really trying to be in the courses where they actually need the support is the goal of the TPT in-person tutoring. So that lends itself to some of why the cost is elevated, because they really do customize and work with the administration. And there'll be hiccups, but those are the things that will be that's the intentionality of it. And then talking to the other school districts where they do that, as long as that communication is good, going back and forth, they typically can work around the schedules and not pull the kids out.
So if, in the past, I'm just putting my reference together, they've always, when they pulled out, the emphasis was on reading and math. And you're saying with this particular tutoring, irregardless of what class they're in, that particular tutor is going to work with that person for that subject matter. So the emphasis is not going to be so much reading and math.
Like if the students have the gaps in reading and math, they may, they still have to read in social studies. They still have to read in reading. It really is going to be around those skills gaps that have come up through Fast Bridge and their pre-assessment, that those students, where those gaps are, will dictate where the tutoring falls. So foundationally, yes, it'll be around reading and math, but they're trying to do it in a more organic way where they're actually applying and or seeing what the students may be struggling with, and that can fall in any course. So it doesn't necessarily mean it's always going to be in social studies or always be in math. It really is looking at the skill set that needs to be built for those students. So at one point, they could hit all of the students' classes just to see, just depending on what they're doing in there.
But I just want to remember, we're saying no specials. Keep in mind the other subject matters, because we always felt like we were the stepchildren. They just did what they wanted to do, and I'm not saying this is what they're doing. I just want to make sure we keep in mind that every subject is important. And we want to make sure we give them their due time.
Ms. Page, when principals are continuing to solidify their schedules for the tutoring at the secondary levels, we'll remind them to be cognizant not to take out of the science, social studies, or some of those other subject areas as well.
Thank you, Ms. Page. Ms. Russell, and then I'll go to Dr. Nguyen.
Yeah, so I will just say my concern, and I can't support this because I'm struggling with additional questions that I just don't know that we have the time for today. But mine is more around the financial of how much we are already spending on tutoring and other interventions. We have approved HR reports with after-school tutoring, with extra supports, and just how much we're using as a district, and I've yet to see like the return on investment for those dollars. I'm also very interested in what the success rate of virtual tutoring for students is, specifically in urban districts such as ours, where we're coming off of a learning loss, and our strategy here is to virtually have kids tutoring. And so I'm having an issue connecting those two things of how that's going to prove to be successful here, but we couldn't get it right during virtual learning. The other thing is my concern around, I understand that Title I dollars are only at the elementary and middle school. We're using a big pot of money to solve an issue that those funds can be used for. And how do we get, if there's a certain percentage at this specific school, then how do we utilize those Title I funds to pay for these types of things? And then, because my fear is that at the end of the year, what I've seen throughout my experiences is that Title I funds get used to purchase supplies and things for the following school year, when these are real life situations that we have now. And I know that there's some fluctuation in Title I funds and some of the other federal dollars. And so that is my concern. It's not with the actual programming and implementation, but the actual utilization of where the funds are coming from to cover this cost.
Yeah, and I can offer a point of clarity on some of those points. Individual schools use title funds to do some of the after-school tutoring and those kind of things, and when they are completing or completed their needs assessments and determine that. So that's why that looks different. These dollars specifically are coming from ESSER 2, and last year when those monies were allocated, the dollars have to go towards addressing gaps or academic gaps or learning that was not completed or couldn't be done while students were in remote learning. So the in-person tutoring during the school day is very different than the typical tutoring that's after school. Everybody doesn't stay after school, and it's eliminating that barrier of having to stay after school. The virtual option just gives flexibility for kids to be able to access it, you know, if they're needing support with their homework and or their schedule doesn't necessarily allow. So it's an additional option that staff can offer as a resource to those students that fall in there. But the reality of it is our staff, typically, you know, if you look years past, there may have been more people to provide the tutoring for the students before or after school and or connect with them virtually. Their capacity and the things that they have to do, we don't have internal staff that can do it. Varsity tutoring, those companies, is very different than asking a teacher to teach remotely, because that's the first teach. This is reinforcement, and they're coming in to talk about specific skills on a specific content, not like first teach and you have to be on here for a complete school day. You may just say, I need some help with my math homework, or I need to practice this skill, and the parent, the child, and the teacher can work out, they should do this 30 minutes twice a week. So that's the difference in the virtual instruction. And some kids it won't work for and they won't access it, and we would not necessarily be paying for it. We'll actually pay for the actual students who are connected, but that's, when we looked at the numbers, here's the maximum amount. So it may or may not actually, you know, reach that complete threshold once we get down and align the kids with who's accessing it. But when we finalize, because we haven't, we come back to talk about the ESSER 3 ARP dollars, 20% of that has to be allocated for instructional and those kind of things. And quite frankly, there are only so many options as far as what we can do. We probably can expand, you know, more in-person tutoring if the companies can do it or provide resources. So you will see some doubling up and redundancy because we're casting a wider net. of students who may be eligible since we have the additional dollars. And those dollars have timestamps on them, depending on when they were allocated. So, whereas sometimes with title dollars, you can do rollover and that kind of thing. And I'm not saying that that's not the option, but we did have internal conversations about what we should be paying for with ESSER dollars versus title dollars. And we do need to do a deeper dive in how we're allocating our at-risk dollars, because the things that we find are working and are sustainable, then we can redirect dollars into research-based practices that we can sustain versus the one-time dollar. So we're trying to be thoughtful around the things that we're doing, and if there is success, how do we reallocate title, at-risk, or general funds to make sure that when those dollars go away, our students still have access to that if we definitely saw success with those interventions.
And just a question for clarity. So what I just heard you say was the dollars being used when we submitted the ESSER 2 application, you attached these dollars to this type of intervention strategy for those in the gap area, and you're choosing to utilize this service as the utilization of those funds.
So the ESSER 2 application, and there may, and Ms. Lisa Walker or somebody may be online, last year when it got submitted to the state last spring, there were dollars allocated specifically for tutoring. So that's why these dollars are being, these are ESSER 2 dollars. They're not general fund, they're not at risk, and they're not title. But that was one of the approved things that you could request. So we are.
I got that.
Yeah.
Yep, that makes sense. That was my question is if this is what you already approved and this is what you're choosing to use those dollars for.
Yeah, that's what the
Thank you.
state approved that,
Gotcha.
yeah.
Yep.
Mhm.
Dr. Nguyen?
Thank you again, and thank you, Dr. Stubblefield, for taking the time to explain, because as you talk through it, it makes it clear. So help me understand if this is what you're saying. We are purchasing an amount of contact hours, and if not used, then we will not perhaps spend $2 million.
Is that accurate? Yes. Dr. Campbell is nodding.
Yes, Dr. Nguyen.
Okay, now, the second question, because of that, then we may not reach actually these 3,000 students, because if I understand you, the virtual option is a choice?
Is it, oh, I may have missed.
Virtual option, sorry.
Go ahead, I'm sorry, Matt.
Oh, you're fine. It's not an option. We are working with our principals to start identifying students that could benefit from using the tutoring service. Since it's during the day, it allows for more students to access tutoring that may not be able to access it outside of the day. So it's really not an option. So as part of their, I'm going to use an elementary class, for example, as part of their rotation, if they were doing rotations during that small group time, one of the rotations will be these students will go and they will work on tutoring with the varsity tutor.
Okay, so they'll be at school.
Correct.
Yes, these will be at school.
Okay, so then the other question is, do you know, the question is, I'm going to ask it two ways. Do you have a copy, or do you know what is in the pre-test, post-test? And are these questions aligned with state standards?
Yes, varsity aligns their content to whatever state they're working in. They are already working with Wichita Public Schools as part of their ESSER's money. So they do align their standards or their content to our standards. I don't, off the top of my head, have their post-assessment or pre-assessment at the tip of my fingers, no.
So you don't know what the pre-test, post-test is asking?
It'll most likely be something similar to our universal screener. It'll identify where kids are in grade level, and then it'll identify what skills that are necessary. And then we can also work with varsity to show them where our students are lacking within.
So if what you said is what you said, then what's the content of those pre-test, post-test questions?
Well, it'll be whatever the content standards are for that grade level. So if it's a reading test, and I'm not sure, I don't have our friends from the vendors here this afternoon. I can get you more information about what the content is, but I'm assuming, and that's assuming, that it's an adaptive assessment where it'll start with grade level, and as kids perform better, they may get something that's higher, and if they're performing lower, it'll bump them down into skills, trying to identify where are those skills that the student needs to be filled in.
Well, once again, this is not for me, it would be for the information for the board.
Correct.
And then last but not least, once again, Mr. Graham, great person, no problem. But how long has this company been in business, and are there documented results from their work?
Yes, I can share another document that we received that gives us a little bit more information about who they're working with currently. I know that a lot of their work is being done on the Kansas City, Missouri side. And so we can look, I can send you that document that gives you kind of the history of the company as well as some of the results that they've received. And I'll get that to
Again,
the board.
I'm not asking
The
for
board.
myself, I'm asking for the board,
Correct.
because I would imagine and hope that the board would want that information as it evaluates. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nguyen. Other questions
Excuse me.
from board members? Great conversation and questions. Thank you, board, for the continued questions and clarification. I think it's important as we move forward with any initiative that we ask these types of questions to make sure we're doing our due diligence. So thank you for the conversation. It is in front of us today for recommended and requested for approval, if that is the will of the board.
Mr. Lopez, I make a motion that we accept TPT varsity tutoring program for our school district.
I second.
There is a motion on the floor and a second to approve the TPT and varsity tutoring as submitted. Open the floor for questions or further discussion.
Mr. Lopez, just when will we get that information about their past history and their success rate?
I'm going to email the companies after our session today and get that information for you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hearing no other questions, seeing no other questions, Ms. Smith, would you please do a roll call vote?
Yolanda Clark. Yolanda Clark. Maxine Drew.
Maxine Drew, yes.
Janie Humphries.
Janie, yes.
Randy Lopez.
Randy Lopez, yes.
Wanda Brownlee Page.
Wanda Brownlee Page, yes.
Rachel Russell.
Rachel Russell, yes.
Dr. Nguyen.
Dr. Nguyen, yes.
Thank you.
Yolanda Clark, yes. I apologize.
Thank you.
Thank you. Motion passes. Thank you, board, for the conversation. Thank you, staff, Mr. Anderson, Dr. Campbell, for the information. Next on our agenda, we have a discussion around our boundaries. If you recall, board, we've had this conversation around our boundaries and moving forward. And thank you all for participating in the survey that was sent out in December so that we can continue this. Purposes of today's conversation is really to continue the conversation, to move forward, to get a timeline and to get updated information. So I believe Lenora Miller will be joining us.
Yeah, and I'll start. I think she's on there, and she can answer any historic questions. We have this on here, RSP, when they were here back in December, you all completed the survey and on your priorities, and how they ranked out was the highest percentage said the most important things is to keep neighborhoods intact, followed by students impacted by the boundary change, and then the contingent attendance areas. And then the other things just follow closely. So based off of that, RSP sent a proposed timeline earlier this week or last week, and it's in the board document. So I just wanted direction and or clarification from the board. If we're going to move forward, one, we need to establish a boundary committee. And RSP is proposing 3 in-person meetings, although if someone's on the committee or making it public and noticing, we'll do all of that so other people can access it, but they're planning to be on site, and they're wanting to hold those meetings January 31st, February 28th, and March 21st to prioritize what possibilities are based off of the information that the board provided as input, and then following the committee meetings to have some public input meetings starting all in April, like 3 days in a row, to give patrons and community people to have an opportunity to provide input around any proposed changes. Once we left the board meeting and RSP went and looked at it, the first phase is primarily impacting elementary, because when we looked at the trend data and where our schools were, the elementaries are the ones who are really over the threshold, and if that balances out, it'll naturally help balance out middle and high school, or you can adjust once that is settled. So just looking for clarity from the board on moving forward. Do you want us to move forward with the committee? And then in thinking about the committee, Lenore, you may have historical context. I know board members are on there, but who are the other stakeholders that definitely should be a part of that, so that we can solicit committee members for the boundaries?
Thank you, Dr. Stubblefield. Ms. Miller, anything that you wanted to add?
Hello, yes, I'd like to add that we would like some insight on what those committees, what members might be considered to be a part of this work, so that we are not hand selecting any particular person, any particular staff member. We were just looking for some insight from the board at their wishes of what their insight might be for a committee group.
Thank you, Lenora. So yeah, I'd be open to, I'll open the floor to the board to see if your interest, again, great to have a couple, 2 or 3 board members to be a part of the committee, and then who else, in terms of stakeholders, as was presented to us, would we want to make sure to include in that committee? And if there's a strong interest of any board members, please share that as well. Dr. Nguyen, I see your hand up, and then Ms. Clark.
This question, I guess this is for Dr. Stubblefield. If you're saying the elementary schools are the first to be impacted, if I understood that correctly, do these elementary schools have site councils?
I would have to go back and confirm. The ones that are overcrowded would be New Chelsea and Wellborn. But I'm almost certain they do. Most of them either have a site council or some sort of PTO and or a title group. So they have some sort of gathering of adults there, but it's not consistent across. They may have a site council, or they may have a PTO group that functions like a site council.
Well, I would think those people would want to be, we would want them on the committee for one reason. However, then that other reason, which would not deny them being on the position, but that they also could have strong feelings not wanting to change boundaries. So that balance would have to be, someone would have to carefully make that balance, so it wouldn't be, we don't want to change. You understand?
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Nguyen. Ms. Clark?
Yeah, I'm aligned with Dr. Nguyen. That's what I was curious about, is like, some of our stakeholders should be those that are greatly impacted, But then I also think there needs to be a voice at the table that kind of helps maybe people think about things just a little bit differently. Because if I'm very adamant, I don't want it to change, it's like, what are my other options? So we probably need to be strategic in that conversation with being able to provide those to those committees, but then definitely those that are impacted so that they have a voice at the table as well versus people that it won't even touch.
Thank you.
Just
Mr.
like to say, I'm in agreement with including the site council to be a part of that. And if all of those members do not want to participate, then we could possibly open it up to other individuals within the area of each of the schools to be a participant. But I also think it's very important that we as board members, that we be a part of it as well.
Thank you. Other thoughts from board members?
I would think you would,
So-
Ms.
Sorry.
Miller and
What's the
transportation.
difference between 1, 2, and 3 committees? Just a number?
They're all actually the same committee. I'm sorry, did I interrupt you, Dr. Pepperfield?
No, that's what
I
I was
think
going to say. Go ahead, Lenore.
The numbers are referring to the first meeting, the second meeting, and the third meeting with the same committee. I believe it doesn't read that way on your document. Unless Dr. Stubblefield has some insight that I don't know.
The only thing in which we can get clarity from RSP, and I didn't think about it, I believe they're all the same committee, but there may be, so if it's Wellborn, New Chelsea, and wherever the students may be thinking about going, you probably would have mixed representation from the group. They all may be at the same one large committee, but we can get clarity from RSP on that. Because if it's two different feeder systems that, like Wellborn and New Chelsea, may not have any impact on each other, so you may need two committees. But that, I would just need to get clarity on that, around that from RSP.
Thank you. So, Ms. Russell? No? So what I was going to just comment is maybe what we can do is, if there are there board members, 1 or 2 or 3 board members who have a strong interest in being a part of this committee, and rather than try to hash out everyone else that needs to be a part of this committee now, if there are strong thoughts about who should be represented on the committee, obviously we should give some input, but maybe allowing those 1, 2, or 3 board members and staff to work through and create that structure of what that'll look like rather than trying to hash it out here. So if there are a few board members who are interested, now would be your chance to say so. I see Ms. Humphreys has a strong interest, Ms. Drew. If there's one other person that would be interested, I see Ms. Russell and Dr. Nguyen, your hand was up. I don't know if you had a question, comment, or if that was a strong interest in being a part of the committee.
An interest in being part of the committee, but when would the committee meet?
So the dates are there, and I believe the time was like 4:30 to 6. I can go back and look at an email.
Okay.
They're planning for the meetings to be in the evening, and I think they carved out 4:30 to 6, but they would be flexible with the committee members, like what is the time that most of the, individuals can be there.
Okay, the other question, can we have 4 on a committee?
So I was just clarifying with Mr. Goheen, so I'll let him
Yeah,
explain.
so if it's a committee, it needs to be 3 or less in terms of the board members. Otherwise, it becomes a board meeting because you'd have 4, you'd have a majority of the board. But they are public meetings, so other members of the board can attend the meeting as a member of the public. It's just the actual membership of the committee has to be 3 or less. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, then I'll be that 4th floater.
Perfect. So thank you, Dr. Nguyen. So it looks like we've got Ms. Drew, Ms. Humphreys, Ms. Russell, did I read that correctly? Okay, who have expressed interest. I think that is a great group to help lead this committee, to work with Dr. Stubblefield and staff and Lenora. But before we close this conversation or continue to move on, and thank you, Dr. Nguyen, for participating as well. thoughts from other board members. I know that committee's going to work on the structure and who else should be a part of that, but just if we have other thoughts of groups that they should be thinking about outside of those that have already been mentioned. Ms. Russell?
I was just going to add that I think once the structure is created, also involving a principal and a staff member from each of those buildings in this process, as well as some of these, when you talk about New Chelsea or Wellborn, they have some strong community partners. And so what is that impact as well? So I think of community partners that are in those schools on a daily, and what does that change for the outcome of that community partner group? So maybe having some of those invested community partners, like the Jenga Club, I was trying to think of one at one of those schools, but so.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Russell. Other thoughts? And I don't know what schedules are like, but maybe the committee, if you can, meet prior to our next board meeting and have an update for the full body at the next board meeting about the structure and potential members or whatever it is as we move forward. I think that might be helpful if the time permits. I know time schedules can be kind of tight though, so.
The only thing I would offer, and RSP can be flexible if, based off of the timeline that they're showing, they would want the first committee meeting to be January 31st. The next board meeting is January 25th. So if that's pushed back, will impact their proposed timeline, because if you're opening it up to individuals, you have to have time to give them notice. So just know that it may shift back, and I could let RSP know that, and then they could work with the committee to create a timeline with the 3 meetings. But it may be meeting closer together. If they're trying to stick with the April 26th, bring it to the full board deadline.
Great. Thank you. Other questions? Thank you, board members, for volunteering and for leading this effort. Thank you, staff. Okay. Continuing with our agenda, next up we have some board discussions. Hopefully, board, you apologize for the late email this morning, but you had a chance to review that email. So we've got a few items under board discussion. The first is board policy, and what this is meant for is just a continuation of our conversation that we had. We've had a couple of meetings where board members have requested to revisit or to look at different policies that we have, and this is an opportunity for us to continue that conversation to see if there are some policies that we would like to revisit or think through. Mr. Goheen has some that he's going to bring forward to us today. Not necessarily no real action needed today, but really, again, we just need to provide direction on if there are policies that we want to revisit, what those are and what we would like to do with them. And we did discuss several policies. I believe it was in a meeting in November. So those are some of the policies that we'll be looking at.
So I don't actually have any policies prepared or changed to look at. We've got a couple things coming up. One is that KSB should have their January proposed policy changes coming shortly. I thought they would have them before today's meeting, but they don't yet. So when we get those, we'll take a look at those and bring those back to the board, coupled with any of the others. The other policies, as Mr. Lopez indicated, we talked about in November, there were some different policies that different board members had brought up for discussion, but before we tried to actually draft any of those policies or make modifications to them, I thought it was appropriate to get board input to make sure those were policies the board wanted to make changes to, if that makes sense. So for example, and some of these are listed in Mr. Lopez's email, some of them were addressed at the board meeting. There was I'll call it a policy, it was really more of a motion and a directive as part of the budget process dealing with purchasing of food for staff at staff meetings or other types of use of district monies to use for staff events, and the board had set limitations on that during the budget talks last summer, I believe is when that occurred. That is the effect of a board policy. There was some discussion as to whether that should be relaxed or modified to deal with to help out with like the environment for staff, to show staff appreciation, to take a look at things where if monies were provided by a grant, for example, could those monies be used separate and apart from the budgetary limitation otherwise set forth by the board? That was one policy that's not in your policy book or not in your policy section of your board docs, but is one that several board members had indicated a desire to take a look at and see if we wanted to revisit. It's probably appropriate to do so in light of the fact that you have budget talks that you're going to start up here in the next month or so. The other one that I had identified that I thought there was some desire to at least have further discussion about is the transportation of students. As you recall, this district does not allow students to transport themselves or to transport other students to activities such as football games, basketball games, practices, things like that. They have to ride school transportation, school provided transportation. That originated out of the fact that there had been an accident several years ago where three students were severely injured in an accident transporting themselves to a soccer game. From that point forward, this district has followed a policy of not allowing that to take place. Other districts do allow students who can drive to transport themselves directly to student activities such as bait tournaments, soccer games, things of that nature. I don't know if the board wants to revisit that or not, but again, before we start trying to develop a policy, we wanted some direction. So I don't know whether to kind of go through these one at a time or if the board just wants an overview, but I need some direction to know whether to put something together to bring back to the board on these. That's what I need.
And you mentioned that particular issue, the transportation. It's also the issue of whether it's 2.5 or it's 1 mile. I don't know if you still have that on, because a lot of parents are still concerned about that. And I know we're working on it. I know Dr. Stubblefield is working on that. But to make sure that we do something to let them know that we do care whether our kids are walking in the street, on the sidewalk, having to deal with all that other stuff that's out there.
That's a good point, and I just wrote a note back down on that, and that reflects the transportation. By state statute, you have to provide transportation if students are within a certain mile radius of a school building. The district has changed that policy over time to where at certain times we provided transportation when it's closer to the school than what state statute requires. I believe currently we just go with what the state statute says. So that was a change a year or so ago. So that's something the board wants to revisit. That's another place where we could make the change. But again, these are discussions that we need to have, or the board needs to have, so that we have direction to prepare the policies that the board wants to have in effect.
And before we do a deep dive on any of the, I think what would be helpful if we spent maybe the next 5 minutes or so just kind of throwing out what those policies are, if you have thoughts on them, and then we can go through them or set up a plan of how we want to give direction on moving forward. But if there are certain policies, and I know Greg gave some, but if there are others that we would like to make sure we revisit, maybe we can spend the first few minutes making sure that Greg has them on his list, and then we can go through them individually. So I know Ms. Drew had a question or a comment, and then I'll go to Dr. Nguyen and then to Ms. Clark.
Well, Mr. Goheen has given a comment relative to what I was going to mention, so I'll pass.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Drew. Dr. Nguyen?
Yes, it's just a follow-up to what Greg said. The state statute limitation is and he will further explain this. That's just based on state funding. We can pick up a kid across the street from the school if we wanted to. We just wouldn't get state funding.
Correct, absolutely.
And then the two policies I mentioned before, buy local and a more robust hiring policy that would center on equity, diversity, and qualifications.
And I have both of those down on my list. They were just, I didn't go through the whole list, but yes, and that's helpful if there are other policies people on the board, your board members want us to look at. I think from an organizational standpoint, so we can be organized about this, it's a good opportunity to bring those up. Make sure we have them down on the list and then get input from the entire board. Are these policies that you want us to take a look at, and in what ways do you want us to try to expand those policies or change them?
Thank you. Ms. Clark?
I wanted to be sure, Greg, the policies that you just mentioned, were you looking for direction on if we wanted to cover those, or you were clear that we definitely wanted to revisit? I'm particularly interested in both of those myself, personally.
I am wanting, first of all, direction from all the board members if there are policies that you want the board to consider looking at and revising. And this doesn't have to be limited to today, but we need to get them down on a sheet of paper so we know those are policies that somebody is interested in looking at. And then if somebody's interested in looking at, I need direction from, is the board as a whole wanting us to look at that, or is that just a single board member that wants us to look at that? Because that, if the board as a whole isn't interested in changing the policy or looking at policy changes, then I don't think you want us spending our time putting a revised policy in place. I think that some of the ones that have been identified, I've heard from more than one board member that there's interest in that, so I'm inclined to think that that's what you want, but I want to make sure before I spend time doing it. That makes sense?
All right, I just wanted to be sure. And then, Greg, I also, and I know I just kind of dropped this one on you last night, but maybe just us thinking about how our employees handle social media. And so I don't know that we have a policy around that right now. I know I've mentioned it. I mentioned it to you briefly last night, but I would like for us to look at how we solicit items through social media, how we reference the district. I think that's important that we use our funding here and that our employees know the resources versus asking for things sometimes that catch us off guard.
And this is a comment from Mr. Lopez, Greg, and Dr. Stubblefield. I believe we need to set our COVID policy off to one side as potentially, as things change, revisiting it.
Yeah, and remember, a lot of the COVID policies the board have adopted are temporary in nature. So if you do get a change in circumstance, either from like the governor's orders or from the designation of pandemic, those policies go away. And so we need to navigate what that looks like. So that's a good point as well.
Mr. Goheen, were there other policies on your list that haven't been mentioned that you just want to make sure?
The other ones that I had down that had been brought up in the past, Dr. Nguyen had brought up an encumbrance policy as a potential policy for the board to consider. I know she mentioned hiring and buy local, but there was also a specific mention of a diversity, equity, and inclusion policy, so I had all three of those together. There was some discussion as to whether the board wanted to revisit or look at the transfer policy for employees between buildings, transfer being different than assignment by the superintendent. And then, let's see. I think those were the ones I currently had down. As reflected from the past board meetings, but if I missed one, I want to make sure I get it if there's anybody that thinks there's something different we should be looking at.
The only other one is around the language proficiency policy that is up for first read. Okay.
Mr. Lopez, are you proposing that we set another date in which we can sit down and look at these as a board to decide which policies we feel are the priorities?
Yeah, I think, there are several on here, and again, to Mr. Goheen's point, if it's the will of the board to really revisit each and
Exactly.
every one of these, I think we do want to spend some time, and, but I want to make sure Greg has some direction in terms of what he brings back to the board, and making sure that we put forward any information that we have on these policies, and if there are other policies that we want to look at. So we wanted to give the board some time to bring those forward today. Not necessarily that we would go through them all today, but at least get started. But I think setting another time for us, or getting them on a regular agenda, to spend some time on them. I know the agendas get a little full, but setting next steps to do
I
that.
think that's important for us to be able to prioritize the information so that we can not have Mr. Goheen be able to get the information and present it to us for us to make a decision we have not agreed as a board. So I would be willing to set a date for us to be able to sit down as a board and make a decision as to what we're going to prioritize, and then present it to Mr. Goheen, making sure that we follow the directives as far as what we need to do.
Thank you, Ms. Drew. Are there other thoughts around policies, anything that we've missed that you want to make sure gets added to the list?
So I will, because of the KSDE requirements, we'll probably bring the LEP policy for first read at the next board meeting. The ESL department and the stakeholders have given input. Greg has reviewed it, so we'll bring it to the board at the next meeting, that particular policy. It's a requirement.
Thank you.
Dr. Stubblefield, what did you say? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry, the LEP policy, the limited English proficiency policy, the district didn't have one, and for KSD, we are required to have one. So Jackie Rodriguez and the ESL department, with stakeholder input from and guidance, have put together a recommendation that we'll bring to the board for first read at the next January 25th board meeting.
Thank you.
Yeah, like on transportation, is something that you want to do or not.
Okay, thank you. So just to be able to give Mr. Goheen some guidance, and I know we want to set aside some time to really dive into these. It would be helpful to provide a little bit of feedback, and maybe we decide we don't want to look at any of it or some of these. So would just be helpful from the board to provide some feedback to Mr. Goheen on these, whether we do want to continue to look at these and dive into them. I know the food, for lack of a better term, the food policy is one that several board members had mentioned that we want to revisit. And I don't know that, maybe we can just go through them really quickly, spend a few minutes just to say yay or nay, one way or the other, if it's something that we want to, and in what direction.
I think that
Is it possible, because of the essence of time, that he could give us the list that's been put together so far, and then we prioritize? And at least if we said these are our top 5 that we want to address, or if that's a quicker way to do it.
I could, the only hesitation, like I could send everybody an email and say, which ones are you guys interested in, and kind of tally it. I just hate that to become a virtual board meeting rather than a public meeting. I don't want to violate COMA by trying to gather that. It seems to me, I mean, for example, I think that I've got a sense that some of these, I think the board as a whole is interested in. Some of them I'm not entirely sure. So for example, the example I just gave Mr. Lopez was transporting students. Sounds like the board as a whole might want to be at least looking at the issue of how close they're transported to school. That's one policy issue you got. But are board members interested in revisiting the policy about allowing students to transport themselves to school activities? Because if you're not, then there's no point in us spending time looking at that and what that would cost in terms of insurance and those types of issues. if you are interested, then we can take a look at that and bring that back, and then you guys can have some policy language discussion about it. That's kind of what I'm looking for.
Okay.
And I don't think it'd take us very long to sort that out, fairly quickly. And I think I'm correct on the food one. I think there at least are a number of board members who want to at least talk about that, so that's one that we would want to have a time set to talk about. The transporting students is probably the biggest one. I'm not sure whether there's really consensus or if it was just a concern that got brought up. So are board members interested in talking about that again, or is the policy good as it stands?
I'll go Ms. Russell, then Dr. Nguyen.
So for the newbie, can you just, because what I think I heard was some of these policies, and I've tried to do some searching as well, some of these are actual policies that we're re-looking at and making changes. When you're speaking to policies, can you let me know whether it's already a policy? Like the transportation one related to students is JGG, and I found that one. The one to hiring is GACC. Buying local and purchasing food are not current policies,
No,
but
they
you
are.
would be okay.
They are-
So
they are
I need
current
some help and guidance in what we're actually what policies we're talking about, so I can be specific. If that's helpful, and that goes back to her comment of that's helpful for me in the decision making. But I will also, while I'm talking, say I am interested in the transportation piece. I think our kids are missing out on opportunities because of our lack of drivers and opportunities for there are teachers who are willing to drive, or there are teachers who are willing to meet students places, but if we are not allowing our students to participate because our transportation system can't get the buses to be somewhere to pick everyone up and then drop them off, that's an unfortunate missed opportunity for our students. And I know personally that is happening. And so I know it's not a comfortable position to be in, but we also have to think about outside of the liability pieces, what other experiences and opportunities our students are missing out on as well.
Sure. And my comments about the reasons why the policy was in effect were just educational, so that board members knew why that had been put into place, not advocating one way or the other for how you do it. The transportation policies are that. Well, let me start off. The policy on the purchasing of food doesn't have a policy number. It was a motion and by the board during the budgeting process, but it has the effective policy because it was a board motion and a directive. So it doesn't have a number, or letter, whatever the right phrasing is. The transportation of students, you actually have three policies that are in effect there. One is JGG, one's JGF. You also have EDDA, and then I don't know off the top of my head what the policy letter is that deals with the distance to transport to school. That's a different policy, but there's one for that as well. So those are the policies that are in effect for that one. And I can go through the others as we go down the list.
I appreciate it.
Certainly.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Russell. Dr. Nguyen?
Yes, excuse me. I am not interested in revisiting the students driving themselves. I am interested in revisiting our mileage situation because it doesn't seem to fit some situations, but we can also put in a statement that circumstances can be granted outside of these mileage allowances, which is already being done. And then 3, I guess, yes, I do want to revisit the conversation about food because those who are here now are not privy to the excessive amounts that were spent, which warranted discussion and investigation on my part as far as invoices. So there needs to be clarification, understanding that there already are provisions for faculty appreciation dinners, and that the decision is by building for 2 events. There is a cap on spending, but I am interested in having that conversation because I don't believe some of the people who are now expressing an interest know the historical background. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nguyen. I would also be interested in the conversation around transportation for students for several of the reasons that Ms. Russell mentioned, so that just for what that's worth. Also the food policy as well. The mileage, I'd be interested in picking that conversation up as well, and the other ones that were mentioned, but I saw Ms. Page, I think, also had your hand up.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I'm interested in the transportation, also buying local. You know, it offends me that we spend so much money around our county. We have people who have donated, buy ads, do everything to support our schools, and they're always complaining that they never have an opportunity. And I think they should be given a chance, put in a bid, and at least have a legitimate chance. Now, no, if it requires a bigger company, I get that. But there are some smaller things we need to be supporting. These are the same people we tax, and we want them to support a bond. And that's hard when you're working, I'm giving, I'm paying taxes, but yet when I try to come and say I have a business and I'd like an opportunity to compete, and they're just eliminated from the start. They don't even get a chance. And it's disheartening. So I would like for us to consider that and to look at that and give these people a chance. We got too many good companies around here that never get the opportunity. And, you know, we're buying Johnson County, not Wyandotte County. It's something wrong with that picture.
Thank you, Ms. Page. Ms. Drew?
I would be in favor of looking at the policy food for staff. I am not in favor of transportation for students to drive to the activities because of the liabilities that may take place. I would be interested in looking at hiring for diversity. I'm still up in the air about local policy as far as buying local because of the fact that the research that's being done has to be done in the right way, and it may be that the people cannot meet the expectations. I would just like more information on that, and so I'm divided between that.
Thank you, Ms. Drew. Dr. Nguyen and then Ms. Russell.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot to include hiring, and the buy local is something that we should look at because BPU has one, a buy local policy. The KCK Chamber has a buy local policy, and I would have to ask for research at the unified government. So I believe we are one of the taxing entities in the county that does not.
Well, you actually have one, it's just not very robust.
And I
We
would,
need to have one that is specific and more in line with if nothing else, KCK Chamber.
Sure.
Ms. Russell?
I was just gonna support the buy local. I agree with many of the sentiments that Ms. Page mentioned and the importance of remembering how wealth is accumulated, and if a big taxing entity, as Dr. Nguyen just said, is not participating in that, how that does create its own inequities and its own structural inequities as well.
Thank you, Ms. Russell. One clarification question, Dr. Stubblefield. The transfer policy, I just want to make sure, that may have already been addressed, whether that was a practice or policy. And just for clarification, that one was around
Teachers
being able to...
not been able to apply for other jobs unless they've been there too. I didn't ever find a policy unless it's one of the hidden ones with no number. It's more of a practice. And I've spoken with HR about just given the competitive nature and the teacher shortage that we need to communicate that anybody can apply for any open job. It doesn't mean that they're going to get it, and not necessarily prevent transfers, because we did lose staff who wanted to go to another building and couldn't transfer to other districts. So if we open it up, it doesn't guarantee that they're going to get to move, but it creates an opportunity for us to keep them as staff members. We can navigate through that. So I'll work with HR to communicate that to building principals and as we move forward. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Ms. Russell?
So did I hear that that's not a policy, it's a practice, but it's a practice that we will no longer continue to utilize? And the individuals who may have mentioned via email previously, that is something that is currently taking place, that they were told they couldn't transfer until they wouldn't receive notification until March. Has that been addressed already for those individuals?
So I think what needs to be clear is I may want the job at Slagle, and I can apply for, what we're saying, they can apply for the job, like shift their application to notify the building principal that they're interested in it. And then moving forward, if the building principals are saying this is a viable candidate, I would like to interview them, and if they select them, they will have the opportunity. Right now, they're not given the opportunity. I am not completely clear on what our practices are here, but we are going to discuss it so that we can clearly make it known to our staff that they can apply. Now, if there's a math opening now at a building and you're a math teacher, typically you would not be able to shift because you're just going to create a burden for somebody else unless it's mutually agreed upon by like the administrators and then HR. So I'm not aware of what we currently do, but we will put some clear guidance in there, and they're typically time and notification. So if the deadline to notify staff that you're leaving the district by state statute is the first Friday in June, all transfers typically follow that, because again, if you leave later, if it's not mutually agreed upon, if the building principal can't find a suitable replacement, you're just putting another building in the bind. But when it's open for next school year, yes, all staff. What I'm saying, we will move forward with allowing staff to say, I would like to apply for a position here or there, and evaluate it. It doesn't mean that because you apply, you're actually going to get to go. That's the part that we have to be clear
I guess
on.
my follow-up is I hear what you're saying, but I'm not hearing that that's what's happening from an HR and an administrator perspective. I'm hearing more or less someone has applied for a job for the next school year. They've been told that the administration would like to bring them on. However, HR says they can't complete that.
So I'll clean that up.
Okay, thank you.
Well, HR, they may or may not, so I'll make sure that I speak with HR. Yeah.
Appreciate you.
Would it help if we had a policy? I mean, if we could,
You do have a policy on transfers, so I just want to
Okay.
make sure everybody does understand. There are actual policies on transfers, and there's also the state statute, so I want to make sure we're all clear on what we're talking about here. By state statute, the superintendent of schools can assign any employee to any assignment in any building in the district as needed, and that's a necessity, right? Because if you have a shortage somewhere and you have to have a teacher over here, or you have to have a custodian over here at Schlegel and they're at Harmon, the superintendent can reassign that individual. That's just part of the job the superintendent has. What we're talking about here, you have two assignment transfer policies. One's GBCE, the other is GACE. The difference is the GACE applies to all employees, GBCE applies to your certified staff. Employees can apply to transfer to an open position. There is no policy that says that you can't apply to transfer if you've only been there a year or whatever. That's if that exists, that's a practice. That's not in your policy. Your policy does say that if a teacher is going to request reassignment, they have to do so by April 10th. Now, that's what the policy says. There can be exceptions made to that by the superintendent. The reason that's in the policy handbook or in the policy is so planning purposes, if I know a teacher's leaving my building, I can then advertise and get that out. That's the reason that exists. It doesn't exist to hinder or hamper employees. It's in there so that if I'm going to leave Schlegel and go to Harmon, then the Schlegel principal now knows I've got an opening or vacancy and I need to advertise and get somebody in for that position. That's the reason for it. But if you want to look at those policies, take a look at them. Those are the two policies that are in effect that are board policies. I just wanted to make that distinction between a request for transfer by an employee versus a reassignment by the superintendent, because the superintendent has that authority regardless of what the employee may or may not want.
Right.
Yes, Ms. Russell.
I just want to make sure, I guess, on this, that we're also offering our staff, to the comments that Dr. Stubblefield had, that we're also allowing them the time too. So if HR is, the practice in HR is that current staff wait till March, but then turn around in April, they have to give their notice. That just doesn't, but that doesn't seem like a fair timeline of making sure. And so that's where I was just trying to find the clarity of making sure we're also allowing staff, instead of them looking other places, because they won't know here until the middle of March what they're planning to do, that we're just providing teachers that also, or other staff, the opportunity as well.
And I was just making sure everybody knew what the actual policy is right now versus whatever the practice might be or whatever you might want it to be.
Right.
So,
And I support the policy because it sounds like there's confusion in the practices, and so.
sounds like it.
Mr. Lopez,
Yes, Dr. Nguyen, please.
before we leave this, and Greg, you can again follow up, I'm not sure if, and this is with respect, our board members understand this encumbrance topic. And the reason I brought it up, once again, there was a legislative post audit that did not determine any number, any percent of money kept on hand to meet obligations. The reason I brought it up, once those legislative post audit reports go out, there's a little spark. So one can expect, after 20 years experience, there will be a mandate later. Now, whether or not, again, we want to have a policy, I'm not tied to this topic. But guarantee it will come down, maybe the life of my tenure on this board or anyone else. At any given time, the legislature is in the mood to say, you will either maintain a certain amount of funds, or because you maintain those certain amount of funds, we will sweep those funds. So, Greg, you may want to add something else to this idea of encumbrance. It's not a mandate now, it may never be, but there is a little spark around the legislature looking at the amount of money we always have on hand. At the same time, if the state payments don't come in on time, you sure don't want to miss payroll.
Yeah, so what Dr. Nguyen is referring to is you don't currently have a policy on setting your unencumbered fund balance as a guidance or anything else. And the legislative post audit came in and did a review of, it wasn't all of the school districts, it was a large number of the school districts. And it essentially, I actually thought it made a recommendation, but maybe it wasn't a recommendation, maybe it just was pointing out the amounts that districts had set aside as unencumbered fund to cover emergencies versus what might be needed or recommended. And there used to be a statutory or legislative recommendation. That went away a number of years ago. But it's generally set at a percentage of operating budget. This district has always tried to look at that as being able to maintain payroll for a month or so in terms of what you look at for that. The only district so far that has adopted one based upon what came out from the legislative post-audit is the Shawnee Mission School District, and I think I've circulated in the past their draft policy, or the policy that they use on that. ASB is not currently coming up or recommending a policy on this. That's what they get in. The advantage of having encumbered funds set aside is that those funds are then set and allocated for that unencumbered purpose. It can then be used as an emergency. So for example, you don't get all of your state funding on day one when the school year starts. You get it over the course of the school year. And some years, legislature doesn't even pay you all of the money they've allocated or budgeted. We've had a couple of years where there's been a shortfall at the end of the year. So if you don't have enough cash on hand, is I guess the best way to put it, at the front of the year, then you've got to dip into those unencumbered funds, be able to cover expenses like payroll or other emergencies that might crop up. So for example, the one in Shawnee Mission, they set a target of 10 to 15% for their contingency reserve, their unencumbered fund balance by policy. So it may be that that's something that you want to consider. If you don't, it's always some degree of risk that those monies are set aside as not, or viewed as monies that are just available to be pumped into other programs, or that the legislature could come in and sweep because they're saying you're not setting those aside for any particular purpose. That's the issue. So.
Thank you, Dr. Nguyen. Thank you, Mr. Goheen. Other thoughts? If not,
What about the social media policy? That was one that got brought up that we didn't previously have. Is everybody interested in something along those lines? I'm seeing nods of head.
I guess I just want some clarity on
Yeah.
what, my concern is Yolanda talked about resources and staff not having access to resources, but I think there should be a mechanism that staff have an opportunity to ask for those resources. And if those resources can't be provided, but they feel that it's important for their classroom, like what is our response to that?
My suspicion, and I don't want to speak for her, is that this relates more to acceptable use of social media by employees and staff as opposed to availability. That's my guess.
I can't speak, oh, she's available, there you go.
Yeah, go ahead. And I'm happy to answer whatever. I've read several posts where our staff members are asking for resources.
Okay.
And so if, that's where I'm saying, what is the process? Right now, I don't know that we have a policy. So to Ms. Russell's, to what Ms. Russell stated, making sure people do know where they can go. Those social media posts are not indicating that they've asked anyone. And several times I've gone back to our staff and said, did someone ask you for crayons? And this is new news to them. So it makes to me, it makes our district look really bad when we're asking for water bottles, we're asking for crayons. Our board doesn't know, our staff doesn't know that our staff is saying we don't have resources for them to be able to purchase these things.
Okay, I understand it better now. Thank you for the clarification.
So I think, just to clarify, it is to make sure our policy saying before you post, you have talked to the administrator, and it's, then there's some clearance so that if we are donating it and collecting it, and we have some of that to a certain extent, specifically with our title schools, because if they're soliciting something that we have allocated title funds for, and they're getting it free and we're doing, it causes some issues with those audits and those such things. So it's not to prevent staff, like if it's something that staff need and we don't have the resources, and we are working together to say, hey, this is then a staff member can put it out there. But the things that have been brought to my attention this year, we actually had those things either in stock, they didn't talk to a principal, or they just assumed they were going to be told no because they were told no in the past. So it's just to help people to know that the first, and it doesn't mean that somebody may say no and it's really yes, but just creating a process and protocol so that we're not looking like we don't have minimum resources in cases that we do. Yeah.
I think this, and I, I don't have it pulled up. I know I've got one, you got one for student solicitations. I think you might have one for solicitations by staff as well. So that might be a place where we would want to take a look at modifying that. It is important that if people are making requests for donations or things that goes through a process rather than just being out there doing that, because it does have some impact on, as Dr. Stubblefield said, grant funding, and it can have some impact on other aspects too. So understanding what that is, let me see if I can find our current policy, and then I can send that out to the board so that you guys can take a look and see if that's something you want to take a look at as well.
Great, thank you. Are there others on your list, Mr. Goheen, or did we cover, do you have enough direction to kind of, that we can go take some next steps?
I think my kind of walk through this is I guess the only one I haven't heard of, sure, it sounds like there's enough interest by at least three, and I'm saying if there's 3 board members saying they're interested in talking about it, I think that means I should bring it back to the board and you guys should have a discussion about an actual policy. The only one I haven't heard anything enough on is the encumbrance policy that Dr. Wynn brought up at the tail end. Is there enough interest by board members to at least take a look at that? Or is that
Yes.
something that there's not? I'm
Yes.
seeing nods of heads, so everyone that I've got on my list here, I'm intending to now try to put something together and bring back to you guys, so you guys can have an actual discussion on the merits of the policy and whether you want to make changes or not.
Thank you.
Okay?
And we'll set a date for that. Thank you, Mr. Goheen. Dr. Wynn?
I guess this is a question from Dr. Stubblefield. And it's related to the social media, but I don't believe, but I know it's not related to requesting resources. Is there a policy or is there an internal practice protocol? Do you, or is there any prior authorization and not censorship, but putting stuff out on the internet, like saying, past example, the board ruled against X, which ended up being a lie, but principals, IIOs or whatever, put emails out to staff, and when then we asked administration, they didn't know anything about it. So do we have a protocol for that?
Not to my knowledge. Greg would probably know better. I do think that typically when they're, from a board meeting, decisions that are made typically come out either from myself or through the communications department, but individuals have interpreted something or misunderstood something and shared it, and then it is shared widely. I don't think we have anything around that. Some of the posting on social media probably goes back to what Greg was alluding to around the acceptable use and what just general expectations for employees of USD 500 around posting things on social media probably falls more under that. But internal.
Let me give you a specific example. There was a request of cheerleaders going to a out-of-state game, and the principal sent email to the parents that the board denied the trip.
Sure did.
Clearly false, but never followed up with this was not the case. So how are we to deal with that?
I mean, in that case, the principal or whomever should have been directed to retract or correct it. And that would be any time that we send out information that is inaccurate or misinterpreted, or if it changes, to retract it. I don't think we have policy around that, but in general practice, that would be an expectation of how you would lead a building.
Yeah, I don't know that you need a specific policy on a point like that. That would become either a miscommunication issue or a personnel issue on a situation like that. No different than any other communication that an employee might make in the scope and course of their employment. So I don't think that's unique to social media or to emails. I think that just is a general it's not a policy, but it's a general understanding of what the job would entail. I don't think that's, or maybe it's within the context of what the expectations for employees are.
Thank you.
So I think that's where that kind of lands.
All right, thank you, board. Thank you, Dr. Nguyen, Mr. Goheen. I know we spent quite a while on policies, but that's one of our greatest responsibilities as a board is setting and maintaining our policies. So thank you, board. So Mr. Goheen has his direction. I'll work with Ms. Smith, Mr. Goheen, Dr. Stubblefield, and to get on all of our calendars and see what the next step and get a follow-up meeting to review these policies and next steps. But again, if at any point there's something that comes up that we didn't discuss today, please let us know and we can revisit. I'm looking at the clock here. We're going to continue on with our agenda. Next on our agenda, just a brief discussion on board practices. And we put this on the agenda really, and this will be part of a retreat. We're looking to have a board retreat within the next few months. Something that we try to do every year just to give us some time to work together and work through some things, including some of our practices as a board and staff. And so I just wanted to open up briefly for you all as board members to give any feedback on any practices that you think we need to revisit or really look at. I did some that have been brought to our attention, and I'll just read those for you all. And again, we don't have to finalize all of these. If there are others that come forward later, we can always revisit those. But some that were brought forward to us were just around expectations for asking questions and when and expectations of when we should receive responses from staff, specifically around board agenda items, and just what is that process, what is that practice, what are those expectations from both the board side and from staff side, expectations about the board agenda and how it's set and when we as board members should expect to receive all the information that's on a board agenda, communication practices, how we communicate with one another, which also includes communications that we expect from the superintendent and that the superintendent and staff expect from the board as well. Reviewing the complaint process, and what I mean by that is when we as either a full board or as individual board members receive complaints or concerns or questions from community members, how do we handle that? What is the appropriate process and practice to do that? What does that look like? So just reviewing that. Reviewing our board handbook. It hasn't been updated in a little while, so really digging through that board handbook and making sure that it's up to date and that the practices that are outlined in that handbook are actually what we are adhering to and have agreed upon. So we've talked about social media. I will, for those board members that did attend the KESB training on the legal things we should be reviewing, they did have a portion around social media from board members and what does that look like and just some potential concerns there. So we'll make sure you get those handouts if you haven't already. And then another one that's come up is just around travel for board members. What does that look like? I know that as COVID is what it is, there may or may not be opportunities for travel. I think supporting professional development for board members and for the board as a whole is important and something that we should try to do as best we can. But what does that look like? Being cognizant and mindful of our resources as well in terms of dollars that we allocate as a board for board travel regarding conferences and things of that nature. So that's another one that's come up. So those are some that have come up to us. I want to give a little bit of time and some space for board members if there are particular ones that other practices or things that you think need to be addressed. Again, we're not doing a dive in today. Today is just really to gather those thoughts and really to do a deeper dive during our board retreat. If there are any thoughts today, we'll take those. If not, think on that. And you can always email Dr. Stubblefield and I, and we can add them to the list.
And I did reach out to a facilitator for the retreat and sent her some initial dates that work on my calendar, then she's going to see what works for her calendar, and then we'll send them out to see which dates. And they were February dates, and then we can talk about, follow-up, but just the initial one to talk through some of the practices. So she'll have some dates back to me, I think by Friday, and then we can send them out.
Thank you, Dr. Stubblefield. Dr. Nguyen?
Yes, I just want to follow up with some of the ones that you noted. And if you're talking, you may or may not be talking about Marcia, but she mentioned that we need to revisit our norms. No one seemed to know where they came from, when they appeared, and all that. So there needs to be some research there. I don't know where this falls under, but surprises also by staff. We're constantly asked not to surprise this person or that person, but I believe at times the board is surprised by information, situations that we know nothing about, have not been given board approval. Staff has been has made decisions without board approval, and which has impacted our governance as well as taxpayers. I don't know where this comes under, but when the board votes one thing and an officer does another, that's a violation of trust as well as the voting process. And I'll go along with your consent calendar. I think there's things on the consent calendar that should not be placed there. The board handbook talks about those that don't demand discussion. Well, and that we also have a policy as far as if it's a contract, a new contract, that's been followed pretty closely. And you mentioned this, agenda items and those attachments coming let's say noon the day of a meeting, and then people get upset if there's a lot of questions. So there's a lot of cleaning up of loose ends that I look forward to having these discussions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Nguyen. Anything else from other board members? Ms. Russell?
I will also just echo, I feel very strongly about the process in which the agenda is set, but also the process of being able to submit questions, and then when I get a response, I have more questions. And so if there is a way, even before we have this board retreat, to continue this conversation, because as a newcomer, I have followed along for more than a couple of years, and I'm still overwhelmed by the amount of information that's sent to me the Friday, which is also my weekend to prepare, and then the quick turnaround that I have to have the questions, and then almost be told not to have questions during the board meeting so that folks don't feel offended. I think that's tough. And so if there's a way that we can lengthen the time in which the agenda is prepared and the materials are provided, I would also support something in that way.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Russell. Ms. Page?
Yeah, and can we get the calendar out to sign up? Because I think at the last board prep, I think you and Yolanda were the only two there, but it should have been one of us also there. So there was a glitch, and I know it was the holidays, but can we make sure we get that list out and make sure that everybody signs up so no one can say that they were left out? And then the other thing is, I barely made it here on time today, but if we say 5 o'clock, it shouldn't be 5:02, 5:03, 5:05. Whether I'm in here or not, we need to start at 5 o'clock because it's beginning to be a joke. People are saying, hey, you guys never start on time. I think we're better than that. That if we say 5, start on 5. And I'm saying that, but don't worry, if I'm not here, I got to deal with that. But if we say 5, it shouldn't be 5:02, 5:01, 5:03. You know, it's like that old saying, if we don't do it, then that says we're telling a lie because we said 5 o'clock. So we need to start on time.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Page. Other thoughts? Okay. And please, as things come up, please send those our way. And these are things that we'll discuss. To your point, Ms. Russell, I think there are some things that I don't think we need to wait. There are some processes and things that I know Dr. Stubblefield and staff and the board are working through and to make sure that we're all trying to be on the same page and get, for questions for board meetings. I think that's something that's important. And we're always encouraging our board members to ask when they do have questions. And so things that we're working through. Dr. Nguyen?
I'm sorry, Mr. Lopez. I would just ask, as you coordinate these meetings, that they don't start at a retreat doesn't start at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on a Friday. But that we have them on either Saturday morning or something like that when we're all fresh.
Great, thank
And do
you.
you plan on them being in person or virtual?
I think the plan right now is in person. But we, I know because of everything going on, we are keeping an eye on what's happening and we're able to function both ways. I mean, you see today we've got a hybrid approach. So I think if we need to accommodate, we certainly will do what we need to.
And Mr. Lopez, can we make sure that we start budget and teacher negotiation, not when we're running and waiting to the last minute, and get it done so if someone is trying to get a job or apply for a job, we got things done. And do as much as we can until we figure out what we're getting, but at least start the process. And we said we were going to do that, but we seem to always fall behind and not do it, and it makes it harder for everybody.
Thank you, Ms. Page. Yes. Okay.
Greg, aren't the letters to notice up topics due in February?
They're due in, technically, I think by the 1st of March, but we had to, in prior years, we had always worked with the union to get our letters out by the 1st of February. And I think we should endeavor to do that again. Frankly, I think we should have a topic for executive session at the next meeting for negotiations. So that we can do that.
And one last unrelated question. Greg, what state statute, is there a state statute, and this is just a generic, executive sessions, is there a statute that restrict board members from knowing a topic of an executive session
No.
prior to the executive session?
No, not that I'm aware of. I mean, the topics for the executive session, well, one, there's only limited topics you can go in for.
I know that,
And,
because we changed the law.
yeah, so I'm not aware of anything that would prohibit a board member from knowing what the topic of an executive session would be.
Well, without, Dr. Stubblefield, and I know you probably share with your officers in the planning period, but that, in my opinion, comes under the category of surprises that, I'll put it like this. One executive session most recently was targeted against two board members. And half the people knew what was going on, and those two board members did not. So past practice has not been consistent with executive sessions not being, topic not being known to everybody. So I'd appreciate Mr. Lopez putting on one of those lists when we have that discussion about informing board members the topic of executive session so that we too can be prepared.
Thank you, and we can figure out how to make that more known, like what the topic is, if it's not like clear in what is noticed on the executive session.
Thank you.
And I was going to make one other note. So one of the things that's down for the January 25th upcoming board meeting, and the goal is I'm living through this first year, is to have a draft plan, which I can update, but it may change because I'm learning things as I go, of what's upcoming up. But one of the things for board discussions at the next board meeting is budget priorities. I will tell you that we are changing the way that we have done the budget in the past. We are starting with building principles and having conversations about their current staffing needs and those kind of things. And starting, we have a meeting with all principals on January 20th, and we're looking at staffing and the needs assessments and talking through what needs to be completed and how it needs to be completed and what data needs to be used for the at-risk assessments and those components, so that we can have those completed ideally by February, so the board would know that. But we do have, for one of the agenda items for the next board meetings is budget priorities. So we'll provide some information to the board so that the board can start to have those discussions. And then when I look down, we just have budget on, for some component on it on every board meeting. After that, just depending on what direction or what information is needed or what we need to look at.
Great, thank you. Thank you, everybody. And again, if other ideas or thoughts, oh, Ms. Russell?
Just another board practice piece that I wanted to bring up is with regard to community engagement and transparency. And so I would like to have a discussion around ensuring that our social media platforms are providing acknowledgement of board meetings, discussion items and such prior to hours before the meeting. I think that's important for our community to know when we are meeting and making an assertive effort in ensuring that that practice is followed, as well as a discussion around what it looks like. As mentioned before, we oftentimes hold listening and learning tours when we're rehiring a superintendent or there is a huge influx of community frustration. And so what does that look like to standardize that practice so that we are finding those opportunities to be in the community as a group listening to our constituents? And so conversation around that I think should be warranted during that board retreat time as well.
Great, thank you. And as you think of others, please share those with us. We've got quite a list, and no shortage of work on our part for sure as we continue to move forward. So thank you. Next on our agenda is just a conversation around board start times. And the reason this came up is there were a couple of meetings where we started our board meeting a little earlier for different reasons, where we started at 4 o'clock, I believe in December and maybe even in November. For different reasons, which prompted some questions around whether we want to revisit what time we start our board meetings, whether 5 o'clock continues to work for folks, or do we want to look at maybe starting a little bit earlier, 4:30, or some times thrown out there. Although, just thinking about how that impacts not only the board members and board members who are working, but also our staff, and are we taking away time from their workday? And to what Ms. Russell was just stating around, families and students and community members who are engaged in our board and attend board meetings, if we moved it up from a 5 o'clock start time, are folks able to get here to the meeting or get to a place where they can watch if we're starting a little earlier? So just thought we would have a quick conversation. I'm looking at the clock, and I want to be cognizant of where we're at. But I'll open it up to a discussion, nothing that we have to agree upon or decide on today, but at least start the conversation if this is something that we want to revisit or not. Ms. Page?
Yeah, I would love to see us, and I don't know, I'm retired, so I'm coming from a different angle. And I know we have at least 3 people who are still working, but I wish we could start at 4, because if we go at 5, sometimes we've been here 12 and 1 o'clock at night. Now, this is not everybody here to 12 and 1, and I know this is our job, but at the same time, I wish we could start either an hour or half an hour early.
Thank you, Ms. Page. Ms. Clark?
Yeah, so I could go for the half hour. 4 o'clock would be hard for me, but I could do a 4:30 maybe. 4 o'clock would mean leaving like at 3, which would really cut into a day on an every other week basis.
Ms. Humphries?
My concern with starting it before 5 o'clock is that when we do have Student of the Month and we ask community members to come participate, that is very early for most people who work. And we want to encourage people to come and participate in our board meetings. And 5 o'clock is very hard for some of the parents the way it is to get their child here to be recognized. So I preferred it when we started at 5:30 or 6 o'clock. But then I'm retired, I'm very flexible in the time, and we've done much better with the length of our board meetings the last 6 months. We're not here till 9, 10, or 11 o'clock, like it was for a while. So that is my preference is 5:30, but no earlier than 5.
And I think that there are, and just to maybe give some feedback, there are things that we might be able to do with the agenda as well, and the order of the agenda in order to accommodate. I mean, we could start with executive session, and that would allow for folks for if there was an executive session, for instance. But I hear your concern, but I think there are some things we can do with the agenda that might help with that, but it may not work in every instance. But thank you for that feedback as well.
My preference is to leave it at 5.
So, Mr. Lopez, one thing I will add is probably the same situation that I mentioned as a board member. I'm a wife, I'm a mother, I'm working. Goes back to what Ms. Humphries mentioned as well. Those people would have those same obstacles also. So if we think about our community at large, the 5 o'clock time would probably be better.
Well, I'm still teaching in the legislature, but I could do a 4 o'clock. Those days, I just make arrangements. And I like the idea, if we were to move it to 4:30, putting those executive sessions first would really work, because even though if I were on the highway, I can zoom in. I'm not texting while driving, but you can still, technology is allowing us to be different places. And COVID has taught us that. So I would support as early as 4:30. I could support a 4.
Thank you. Again, today, I don't think we need to make any decision, and just being cognizant of time as well. I don't want us to rush into a decision. I think this is good feedback for us to think through, and we can bring this conversation back if it's something that we do want to change. I'm hearing kind of a mix from board members, but there's potential opportunity to revisit a start time while also being respectful of board. I think another consideration is of staff time as well, but of our community as well. Ms. Page?
And if we don't change the time, let's at least work on the agenda to make it where we should be able to meet, depending on the topic. Some things are real controversial, but 5 to 7, 5 to 8, anything over 8. And then if we're dealing with finances, I never think you should deal with budget issues that late, because we're not at our best. So let's just be cognizant of the agenda to make it work and work smarter. We're not working smarter, we're working harder. And again, I know I ran to do this, but we don't get paid for this. And I'm not trying to be funny, I get that. We chose to do it because it's our civic duty. But at the same time is of essence. Let's work our time smarter.
Thank you, Ms. Page. Ms. Russell?
Yeah, and I would just, the conversation around boundaries is really important. And so supporting that, I do think that I could get on board with 4:30. I do think 4 o'clock is kind of rough for work reasons. But the other piece that I think you mentioned that I do want to elevate again is the rearranging of the agenda. While I know that our community is so grateful when our students and individuals get the opportunity to present and be presented in front of us, I also think that we owe them more than those 2 or 3 minutes. And so if there is a way to rework the agenda where we do have that opportunity for us to get out of our chairs and to do more than just you all taking a picture, because they're making the time to get here. And I think our students deserve that. And so if we can have more of some type of way of redoing the agenda, especially for those recognition times, I think that's important, so.
Great, thank you. Well, we will bring this topic back up, so thank you for the feedback. As you continue to get more feedback, or if you hear from folks that feel very strongly one way or another, we'll revisit this topic. So next on the agenda is we wanted to revisit our conversation around a remaining bond balance. This has been presented to the board a few times now, and so we're bringing it back forward today to just revisit particularly a couple of items and recommendations that have been made from staff in terms of how to use some of those remaining dollars. And so I would invite Dr. Turan or Dr. Stubblefield, if there's anything that you need to share prior to. There are a couple of items that I believe are being recommended for us to potentially move forward on, and how we use those dollars. So
the only thing that I'm requesting based off this, and first I acknowledge one of the things on there in discovering just background stuff, the Eisenhower field, the athletic field, I know I've come to realize that really wasn't fleshed out here at the board, and we do want to figure out how to write that and in order to determine what direction we need to go there. But the 2 items that we're asking for the board to possibly take action on, if not today, at the 25th meeting, no, actually, possibly not today, but at the 25th meeting, and so we can answer any questions, is the elevator at Washington High School, because without an elevator, it really limits the access to anyone who would need to access an elevator, and it does cause some ADA challenges, or could possibly cause some ADA challenges. And then the other one is Bethel. Originally, the board did allocate about $1 million to renovate or update it, and it needs some additional dollars. And so those 2 things, so that the bidding and the processes for both of them can move forward. Those are the 2 things I would be asking the board to either take action or to let us know, so that you'll know how much money you have left in order to allocate somewhere else, and larger discussions around what needs to be done. So Bethel is in need of an additional 1.5, and the elevator at Washington is about 1.5 as well. So it'll be a total of 3 million of the
6.2 million.
6.2 million.
Mr. Lopez,
Yes, Ms. Page.
question. Washington does need an elevator, but my question in regard to that, we have an elevator in every high school? Is Washington the only school that doesn't have an elevator?
We've got Doug coming to the microphone, so give us just 1 minute. Thank you, Ms. Page, for that question.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's unusual to say that. Doug Clemens, Director of Physical Properties. Yes, Washington is the only high school that does not have an elevator.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure we didn't leave anybody out. And then my second question, in regard to Bethel, they needed additional money to do what? What else did they need, or what didn't we figure in when we came up with the estimate?
Well, there's a couple of points on that question. Really, the original number that you saw were hard costs, and it was a little bit low. And then the decision was made just to put down what was needed extra for all the soft costs and inspections and permits and all that stuff in additional needed funds. But then we also do have, as we go through this process, first we've had some cost acceleration just in the construction field in general has gone up considerably. And then as we're looking at that building, trying to make that building meet the guidelines for Head Start, there's a couple of things that we can do, whether we add a secondary egress from every classroom, or we could put in fire sprinklers. Well, we're choosing to do the secondary egress. Fire sprinklers would be much more expensive. So that leads to, it's kind of like pulling a thread on a sweater, you know, because now we got to create the secondary access. In order to do that, we have to go through the metal shelving, which is old and beat up. And so we thought through the process, well, do we just try to patch that or do we replace it? Well, really, we need to replace it. Well, so that's about a $200,000 ad. And then, okay, now we're going to have to do something with the floors. And we have found, since original, that every floor, the whole floor is, we have to do some remediation work. So that adds quite a bit to that process. So it's just these extra things, trying to get a full, really complete, well-done project is adding extra costs. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Yeah, and then I also have a question because the bond where we did all the buildings, I asked this question and you were honest, and I don't know if we still rectified those problems. When you build the restroom, you had those air blowers, and health departments have said that's not the best thing to use.
We've gone back through and put in paper towels.
Okay,
Yeah.
at all of them?
As far as I know, I'm going to say yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, we will verify. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then with the new thing about air and ventilation, will this new building, in terms of environmental things, will that adhere to that? And have you added that cost?
Bethel?
Yeah,
Those units, we actually have replaced those rooftop units through, actually, I think through the ESSER funds. So that has already been done and not included in this process.
Okay.
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay.
Thank you,
Any
Ms.
other questions I can answer for anybody?
Dr. Nguyen has a question. Dr. Nguyen? She may have frozen up on us. I know she had her hand raised, so we'll see if she pops back up online. In the meantime, are there other questions for, regarding?
Well, I have another one. Now, these are the two that you're recommending, but did we do something in terms of ventilation with air because of COVID at every other building? Have we done that?
We're going through the process now. We're actually in the process of replacing some rooftop units everywhere, really almost everywhere. We went through, again, through the ESSER funds, and we're in process. It's not going nearly fast enough of installing these little 2x2 light fixtures you see up here are actually the ones that when Mr. Covington was here, we went through that. That's a very high efficiency filter, draws the air, so we're putting those in every classroom, every place where the groups meet in the buildings. So that's all being done through ESSER.
And then what about, you were doing some work at some of the elementary schools. Do we have those better water systems, the water bottle? And have we fixed some of the older schools like Quindaro? You did go in and redo the toilets and things because there was some leakage?
Yeah, we had a broken pipe in a wall there at Quindaro, so we had to find that and get to that. But we're not done there yet. I think we still want to try to focus on doing some improvements to Quindaro specifically through some capital funds this coming summer. And I've lost my thought. You asked me something
Well, no,
else.
I was just, we're saying we have this money left. I didn't know if there was a possibility to go to Quindaro, McKinley, some of these older elementary schools, and kind of get them up to par in terms of environmental reasons
sure,
and
yeah.
with COVID. So would that come out of this, or is there money already allocated for that?
Yeah, you asked about the water fountains too. Let me go back to that. I'm sorry. Yeah,
Okay.
we have been in the process of putting in at least one bottle filler type water fountain in every single building. Most of the bigger buildings we're putting in multiples, but again, through ESSER funds, we got it approved to go back and put another one in.
Okay.
So we're working through that process. We hope to
Okay.
get that done. And yes, I mean, frankly, I would love if y'all want to say, okay, we'll go spend $1 million and fix up restrooms and everything. Okay, great, we'll do that, but
But I was just wondering, I didn't see it here, and since we had extra funds, why wouldn't we go back and fix them?
So I think that is one of the conversations, like of the list that was generated and put forth, when we looked at it as administration, the two that rose up was like Bethel, because we've already invested money, and then Washington, because they didn't have an elevator. The other ones were just ideas, and I think based off of what's left, if the board allocates the money there, the board can then determine how those dollars are spent. And I know at a previous meeting, Dr. Nguyen did ask, was there a deadline? And we found out that you do have time, so that will allow you to have some rich discussion and prioritize. Once, what we can share as an administration is what are those things that we already have dollars allocated through our capital projects, and then that'll help you to see where there may be gaps. And then some of the things that needed to be upgraded, we were able to pay for out of ESSER dollars, because they do create a healthier, safe environment, and just being clear about that, so then you can prioritize around that. I think, and we can carve out some time in a future board meeting just for you to generate a list or come with ideas, and if we know before we can bring any background to that.
Thank you, and thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Dr. Nguyen, you're back. I know you had a question.
Apologize for the internet gremlin got me. One, I just wondering, will the renovation of Bethel then require us or allow us to fulfill all capacity needs of early childhood, or will we still use the current buildings that we are using now for Head Start, for example?
So we would still use the current buildings. What it will do is allow us, now that you can count 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds, we will be able to serve more students, but we still would be using all of the locations.
And then I came in on the tail end. At that same discussion, I asked, I thought it would have been provided an estimate of what it would cost to make sure the bathrooms that were not renovated, what will it take? And I don't see this figure anyplace. I just came in on the comment of the gentleman saying, if you want to spend $1 million, then we will, but will it cost $1 million, or was that just a flippant comment?
Well, that was just a general comment, and I'm sorry, we did put together some numbers, and I don't recall what those are. I'm sorry it's not here on the sheet, but.
And I may have them, actually, I'm not certain, I have tons of emails, but I can actually send it to you in the end of the week, communications or in any other additional information, so then when we come back together to talk about it, you'll have it.
Ms. Russell?
My question, I would like to have further conversation about Central Middle School, and understand a little bit more. I know that came as a recommendation from you all, but I'm seeing that it doesn't have a number attached in the land swap, and we can talk about it at a later date, but I do have questions about that. Also, is this Renovate Fairfax White Church, is that the building that's being implied here, or the old building?
I'll have to be honest with you, I don't really know. Again, that came from the former CFO, COO who
Okay.
included that. I believe he intended that to be the actual Fairfax building down on 9th Street.
Okay.
We have some HVAC issues there that prevent proper ventilation and circulation of air in that building, which is really the biggest issue. And we had an estimate of about $600,000 to fix that up. That's dated at this point.
Okay.
So I think that's what he was talking about.
Okay, and I just want to follow that comment through. Once you find out, I am interested if we are looking at renaming that facility, if that is the new facility at White Church. I would want to see that come closer to the top of the list if it's Fairfax White Church, not Fairfax 9th Street, because it makes sense to me that if we're going to rename and spend all that time and effort so the students can have a great environment and name for their school, that we should do those things hand in hand, instead of saying, well, here's your new name and we're going to work on your clean building later. So It's not, for sure? No? You're sure? Okay, just checking, thank you.
I'm sorry, what I was referring to is, and on the sheet you're looking at, the red pieces are things we've added, but where the two asterisks are, the two asterisks, Bethel, land purchase, and then Washington High School, those are the things we would recommend now. We're not recommending at this time any renovation for Fairfax, either the White Church building or the old building, nor a purchase building across from Schlegel Stadium, the ones in blue. We are recommending, although it's in blue, exploring looking for land for Central Middle School. We think that's a real need, and that's still in process, and it's at very, very initial stages.
I thought these were all suggestions provided by you all, but you were emphasizing on the red ones.
These are, yes, they are. But it was kind of a transition from some that were here that have kind of been ongoing over the last 6 months, a year or so before I was here. And then we sort of regrouped again and recommended specifically looking at some additional things. For example, Eugene Ware addition is still on there, even though frankly with the boundary study, it's likely that right now, we wouldn't recommend anything because it's a school that may potentially be impacted by the boundary study. So right now before you, we really have 3 recommendations for your consideration at the next meeting: remodel Bethel, Washington High School, and we're really not ready to move on any land purchase of any kind for Central Middle School.
Okay. Thank you for that information. I will also say, as a community member and as someone who has heard the feet on the ground, I do think that we need to have a quicker conversation about Central Middle School because it continues to be pushed off, and it is not my goal to say, hey, find all the time to figure out a solution, but I do think that we've pushed them off for a very long time, and I would like to see some forward thinking in what we can potentially do to level the concerns and all of the issues that have been brought forth. So.
Ms. Clark?
Yeah, I just need some clarity, and maybe I need to get this later. The comment that was made about the renaming from Ms. Russell, I need to make sure I don't have any action items there. I missed what she was trying to say there, or was that cleared up?
I think it was cleared up. She was just saying we need to figure out if we're renaming the White Church location or the Fairfax location, if it's going to be renovated and they're going to go back, because it's Fairfax White Church now because they're at White Church. So we just need to get some clarity around that, like long-term. And yeah, we need to get some clarity because I didn't know they were planning to move that.
Okay, thank you.
So what I understood was this renovate Fairfax is Fairfax on 9th Street, not Fairfax at White Church. And I was saying that if we're doing the work to rename and we'll have to repurpose some of the signage at White Church, then the renovation should take place with that. But what I heard was this is Fairfax at 9th Street. Therefore, I'm fine with the recommendations and I don't need any further clarification, so.
Yeah, I was just saying we need clarity because I'm not 100%.
Okay, I was just saying, I don't want you to do it on my behalf.
No,
Okay,
it's on my behalf.
Thank you. Further questions?
So for clarity, since that's the big word right now, we're only going to vote on 2 things on the 25th. That would be the remodel of Bethel and Washington Elevator, if I heard it correctly.
Correct.
Correct.
Yes.
But I am being transparent because I did send you some information that is not completely out there. There have been discussions around it, Eisenhower Stadium, and the board has not had a discussion around that, so that would be on a future agenda for you all to talk about that, because there is money that's set aside that has been there in capital outlay that says Sumner Stadium, but I've come to find out that those two have been used interchangeably. So I think we all just need to be on the same page about goals and what around that. So that'll be on a future agenda, yeah.
And then I just wanted to say, and I taught at Central, and I'm a proud Bear Cub. And I don't think the intent is to keep pushing them back. You gotta have money. And we just went through a bond issue. It's an economic factor as well, and everybody has to keep that in mind. Nobody wants their taxes to go up. But if you want these things, then we gotta be willing to pay for these things. And in lieu of what our economy is like now, we have to keep all that in perspective. Because I would love to drive a Benz, but I don't have that kind of money. I gotta do what I gotta do, so we gotta be realistic about this. So we gotta keep that in mind. It's not to push them out or push them back. We gotta do it within our restraints.
Thank you, Ms. Page. Dr. Nguyen?
And this is a statement for you, Dr. Stubblefield. I am of the opinion that the staff has the cart before the horse on many projects. The board has never been engaged in these project discussions, and that Mr. Covington would maybe mention something, and then what we find out later is that negotiations are along the way. And this is a continuing concern. Now, when my constituents listen to the board meeting and say, hey, so what are you doing here? My answer is, I don't know. And the response is, well, the board will have to decide. And my response is, the staff continues to make decisions and bind this board and the taxpayer of KCK. And I believe this is a issue that you as superintendent, because remember, you're our only employee, needs to make it very clear that they cannot strap the board, cannot strap the taxpayer, and then we just rubber stamp their action. So you know, board members, you may or may not believe and feel as way as I do, but my constituents feel that many times staff does not, one, respect the board and has made decisions that encumber funds, cost the taxpayers dollars, and we don't know anything about it. And so Eisenhower is an example of this. The land swap is an example of this. When asked, what are you talking about? It's like, oh, well, you know, it's too early in the discussions. We can't tell the board or the public, and other things. So this has to stop.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Russell?
I just want to say that perception, and we talk a lot about equity and equitable access. We have to think about the buildings that we've renovated, where we've renovated them, and just what that perception for our community is. And I will be on the bullhorn about those things, because I do think that is a very valid concern that community members have stressed. And that is why I say we can't leave people behind, because all of our students deserve to walk into buildings that have water fountains that they can put their water bottles to. All of our students deserve flex spaces and these types of things that all of our buildings don't have. And so that is where I come from, and I want us to continue these conversations. And even if the money's not here now, how do we get to there, and how do we help the community see that? And so we can have conversations around bond that the community feels comfortable and safe about, because they've been a part of those conversations along the way. So.
Thank you. Any other questions? Again, no action today. This will come back around at our next board meeting for those two recommended items. Thank you, Dr. Turan, Mr. Clements. Okay. looking at our agenda, we will not need an executive session today. So those are all of the items for today. Thank you, board, so much for your participation, staff today, for the great conversation. And with that, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.